Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your host, Joanne Leon.
And on today's episode, May 11th, 2018, we discuss President Trump's removal of the U.S. from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, popularly known as the Iran deal. Trump's withdrawal from the Iran deal led to a severe escalation in the Syrian war that began just hours after the withdrawal, and also has rippled around the world and led former U.S. allies, current U.S. allies, who knows, to question U.S. commitments, given that it was a deal initiated by a previous administration. So here we are, Joanne, on the cusp of possibly another war in the Middle East, or at least an increase in the stakes of the Syrian civil war that just can't end. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, even though the withdrawal from the deal may have been somewhat symbolic since we weren't really implementing it the way it was supposed, according to its terms anyway, and you can say what you want about the Iran deal, but the official backing away from it has triggered some serious escalations. And, maybe people disagree on whether Europe is going to stick with us, whether they're going to cave in or whether they're not. But their reaction, they're publicly showing that they are pissed off. You have the French finance minister and the French foreign minister saying some pretty strong things. France's finance minister says European countries should push back harder against the Trump administration over the Iran deal and not act as vassals to the U.S. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran Accord isn't a reason to dump decades of transatlantic ties altogether. This is from a CBS report, quoting French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said on Europe One radio that Europe should not accept that the U.S. is the, quote, world's economic policeman. Quote, do we want to be vassals who obey decisions taken by the United States while clinging to the hem of their trousers? Le Maire asked. Or do we want to say we have our economic interest? We consider we will continue to trade with Iran. It's kind of a weird quote there, but. And then Foreign Minister Jean-Yves, I don't know how to pronounce this, Jean-Yves Le Drian, meanwhile, condemned the U.S. move to reimpose sanctions on foreign companies trading with Iran is unacceptable. In a newspaper interview, Le Drian said Europeans would, quote, do everything to protect the interests of their companies and plan to lead, quote, tight negotiations with Washington. So that's...
So wait a minute. So now what part of this deal is that in the event the Europeans continue to trade like they were going to, like they agreed to under the Obama era deal, they will be sanctioned because they're doing business with Iran?
Well, I have a little clip from the Trump's speech.
Since the agreement, Iran's bloody ambitions have grown only more brazen. In light of these glaring flaws, I announced last October that the Iran deal must either be renegotiated or terminated. 3 months later, on January 12th, I repeated these conditions. I made clear that if the deal could not be fixed, the United States would no longer be a party to the agreement. Over the past few months, we have engaged extensively with our allies and partners around the world, including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. We have also consulted with our friends from across the Middle East. We are unified in our understanding of the threat and in our conviction that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. After these consultations, it is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. in just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction, and we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. Today's action sends a critical message. The United States no longer makes empty threats. When I make promises, I keep them.
So you see, he goes out. You can see why Europe is so pissed off, because he says.
But they're not. Wait a minute. Wait. So trading with them on anything, like, for example, there's apparently a deal for planes, an Airbus deal. That counts as helping them with their nuclear ambitions? It's ridiculous. I mean, you're trading with Iran. I guess anytime you trade with Iran now, any assistance you give, I guess that has to be the case, because the whole point of the deal was to remove the sanctions so Europe could do business there. But I just think that's a strange, well, not strange, but kind of absurd, isn't it? They're buying planes from Europe, which Europe, of course, wants to sell them, Airbus. But because, I mean, how does selling them those planes or doing other kinds of business further their nuclear weapons program?
Well, it gives them money. I don't know.
No,
I just don't know what they
it's
are.
rhetorical, I guess. I'm saying, that the Europeans have every right to be pissed. And in fact, we should also mention Der Spiegel, the major magazine in Germany. Essentially, it's a picture. We should describe the picture of this article is a middle finger with Trump at the tip of it. Essentially, or a hand giving the middle finger with Trump at the tip of it. And it's essentially saying the Transatlantic alliance is over, that Germany needs to become part of, quote, the resistance, unquote.
The picture says that Trump's giving Europe the middle finger, saying, goodbye, Europe, we don't care about you. And it's a pushback saying, time for Europe to join the resistance, which is pretty. Klaus Brinkbaumer wrote it, and I think it's going to make a big splash. I think he said it's going to go out on newsstands.
Oh, it's already making a big splash in U.S. media elite circles. It ran on Drudge Report. It was focused on Memorandum and some of the other major sort of places you can look to see what people in D.C. are reading. It was big on Twitter. So, I mean, the graphic alone obviously made a lot of splash, but I think just the content of the Germans bucking their the American empire a bit. And now, let's be clear: Der Spiegel is not a partisan newspaper, or doesn't reflect. And you just gave actually the Angela Merkel quote, so it's not official German policy, but that's such a major publication. This is essentially kind of one of the major publications of record in Germany, saying not just that they disagree with the decision, but it's actually time for Germany and Europe to chart their own course. It's a pretty, rhetorically at least, major step towards maybe. I see. The problem is the EU has its own internal divisions. So I don't know if it's going to be a step towards Europe, but it might be a step towards Germany stepping away from being such a handmaiden to the U.S. empire. I mean, the U.S. still has military bases in Germany, right? Ramstein and other bases. And Germany typically goes along the U.S. way. Maybe Germany is going to, stand out on its own. France is already, showing its independence. I haven't heard anything from the UK, which is going to be an interesting thing to watch. Interesting dynamic to play out. But so the Europeans, it should be noted, once this deal was done, which the Europeans participated in, they said, okay, great, we've got a deal. We're going to start doing business in Iran. We've wanted to do business in Iran for years. In fact, many of them were doing business in Iran when they weren't supposed to. So they're in there now. They want to set up, they want to get in on this emerging market, if you will, and to have Trump then turn around and negate the deal and threaten anyone who, partners with Iran with sanctions. That isn't just to damage their political pride. That damages their bottom line. And a lot of companies are going to lose big money. And, Europe has this big virtue signaling routine it always does in international affairs because it doesn't have major military power anymore, so it can't do much else to show its quote-unquote influence. But at the end of the day, they're not so different than the imperialist powers of old. They really care about money and economic power, and having their legs taken out from under them by Trump without, I guess, a modest consultation seems to be sitting pretty bad. So, the question I have is this going to do a lasting damage to the Transatlantic alliance? Here's the other thing. They're kind of been looking for an excuse to step away from Trump, haven't they? Yeah, personally, they don't like what he represents.
Yeah, they've made that clear all along. But I think there was an understanding, too, like when this deal was being negotiated. I recall that the European, what you have going on is you have the industrialists in Germany, France saying, screw these sanctions, right? They've already been dealing with the Russian sanctions, which some of them, it definitely damaged their businesses, caused trouble. They've been dealing with that, and it's been difficult to renew them. I guess they've been going on for like 4 years now, and every 6 months they have to be renewed. And it has to be a unanimous EU decision. Each country has to agree to them. And, it's been a scramble each time. I don't know about every single time, but certainly there have been times when it was hard to coerce some of the European countries to agree to it. So now you've got the Iran sanctions slapped back on. And one of the things that they were
how are they going to get energy? Russia is their biggest energy supplier. They can't get from Russia, and now they can't get from Iran, another major energy source. Is Europe going to how are they going to get?
Germany is at the moment building a Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany, so that's a major bone of contention, and that's a whole nother thing. But the thing with the Iran deal is that this is exactly what the French and German companies were worried about. They were worried that they were going to start. There were planes from Germany landing in Tehran the day the thing was signed. They really want to invest in Iran's oil production and just get, they want to sell them cars. There's a 80 million, I think, population in Iran.
And Iran wants to buy. It's
a vibrant society. They have bad economic times at the moment. There's potential for, a robust consumer market there. And they want into it. They have complementary needs and, capabilities. So, but the thing they were saying is, if we start investing over there and we start making deals and this and that, and then all of a sudden you start sanctioning us before you pull back, this was exactly their biggest concern. And here it is, it's happening. So it's not exactly a shock kind of thing. Like, I think that European companies had already pulled back because this deal's been shaky for a while. But, but still, it's certainly a breaking point of some kind.
Plus, it's Trump. It's also, and this is Der Spiegel pointed this out, it's Trump backing away from another international agreement. So he pulled out of Paris, the climate change accord, which was a symbolic middle finger to Europe, among others. And now he's pulled out of another, painstakingly negotiated diplomatic deal that isn't just a, middle finger to Europe. It's also, hurting them in the wallet. So if you're Europe, if you're a European, power, Germany, France, you have to wonder, this is kind of humiliating, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what the French minister, was
So are they
basically
going to just
saying
what are they going to do about it is the question, right?
and it's kind of funny because Macron, when he came over here, subjugated himself. He was called a poodle. He acted like, all that. And so, but all that was for nothing, apparently, because Trump just like did kind of give him a finger on the way out. And even though the news is saying that Angela Merkel is, more calm in her reaction to it, she also said, this is from Bloomberg, but you can find it in a number of different news outlets. Merkel says Europe can't count on the U.S. military umbrella anymore.
Oh,
German
good.
Chancellor.
Good.
But this was just yesterday, I think. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Europe can no longer count on the U.S. for military protection and must take its destiny into its own hands. Merkel's comments on Thursday reprise a theme she first sounded last year in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's America First foreign policy and his hectoring of European NATO allies for allegedly spending too little on defense. It's her latest retort to Trump, who this week withdrew the U.S. from a nuclear accord with Iran that European powers say they will uphold. So, she's flinging I think the EU needs an army at him again. And like you said, this happened last year.
He should absolutely call that bluff. Are they going to spend the money for an army? Are they going to make even more cuts to the social welfare and live to see another day in elected government? The answer is no. Although, let me be very clear. I hope so. Yes, please, by all means, have us stop paying for this ridiculous military. Please dissolve NATO and cover your own defenses, or just take it over and say this is the European Defense Force. Please.
Well, I think it either, I don't know if she's just trying to rattle the NATO.
Yeah, but nobody cares.
Well,
what does this mean? What does this mean? We're going to have to take our destiny into our own hands. Go ahead. Go ahead. Do it. We dare you. You have to pay for it. That's the whole point. It's bad enough that we're building this massive military that we don't need and that's getting into trouble all around the world. But Europe is getting a complete free ride on it. So absolutely. I think nobody should be spending their money on these, boondoggle arms, projects like the F-35 or all these other military hardware nobody needs, or, having these big standing armies. But if that's the threat, let me tell you, as an American, I beg you to try to get that threat realized. Of course, what will actually happen is she'll go to France, she'll go to the other countries that still remain in the EU, obviously not the UK anymore, and she'll say, hey, I want you to create a European military, and they'll all say, no.
Well, especially if with Brexit going on at the same time, too. UK is one of the strongest military forces in Europe, if not the strongest. But I think what she's trying to do is and this is just my own opinion. I haven't really read anybody's take on what she's doing, but I think that she knows that the military will freak out at the thought of losing, the U.S. military bases in Germany are super critical to all of our operations, to our operations in Europe, but also our operations in the Middle East and Africa. So AFRICOM, I don't think, does that have a headquarters yet? I think it's in Germany, or it was. Maybe they're building a new one now. I think they might be, but
well, it's also, Ramstein, especially where a lot of people get medevaced and they get hurt on the battlefield to go to Ramstein because there's a huge military hospital there. But here's the other question: if let's say Merkel just goes hardcore for some reason and orders the U.S. to leave, I'm not so sure the U.S. agrees to that. I don't think. Remember, we weren't invited to Germany; we invaded. I'm not sure exactly that the U.S. military takes a, order from the German government to leave. I'm not so sure that even gets followed.
Well, they just try to regime change, I would assume.
Regime change in Germany.
Yeah, so
you need to bring democracy to Germany. The elected prime minister is not agreeing to our demands.
I don't know what kind of shit. It stirs up a shitstorm, that's for sure. And I suspect that what she's trying to do is to get the NATO poobahs and our military to push back on Trump, to put the pressure on Trump. I suspect
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they all told him to not do this.
I think that they believe, and it's probably a good assumption, that the military brass are the only ones who are going to be able to, influence Trump's decisions and make him change his mind. However, you have to think about what's going on, why that war cabinet shuffle was such a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, this is the idea. Like the idea that the generals controlled Trump. I mean, they're definitely trying to control him, but this is, if anybody is pulling the strings on this one, it's Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby, which is a real powerful force in DC. You notice there's been no condemnations. Even every time there's like a leak now or a story about how Israel actually had their, influencing Trump's election and influencing his policy, there's no Russiagate, doom music. It says, oh, well, Israel has a very important constituency in DC. So they've been pushing to kill this deal. They hated Obama. The Netanyahu-Obama feud was real. And so if he's listening to anybody besides his own campaign rhetoric, he did trash the deal endlessly. He's in league with Netanyahu. And the Israeli hardliners, not all the Israelis, but the Israeli hardline government, which has essentially very afraid of Iranian power. And so they want to push back and they want to get back. Netanyahu, this should be noted, gave a big presentation before Trump did this about intercepted or, I guess, covertly obtained intelligence on the Iranian nuclear program. And that looks like a media PR campaign to justify what Trump then did, which was withdraw from the deal. So this is a coordinated. So if Trump's listening to anybody, he's not listening to Angela Merkel, who he could give less of a crap about what she thinks about anything. He's much more interested in what Israel has in mind, and not just Israel, I should note, the Saudis. King Solomon, the new crown prince, came on a DC tour. You think this didn't come up? The Saudi-Israeli-American alliance, as Andrew Basovich talked about, is real, and this is a power play. And so I think Europe just is irrelevant. Europe doesn't matter, which is one thing to know. It's another thing to be hard to refute when it's so publicly clear that for Trump and the current American government, Europe just doesn't factor in.
Yeah, well, he may think that, but reality, is another thing.
Well, it doesn't factor into his decision-making. Whether it should or not is a separate question. I'm just saying it's clear to Europeans can no longer deny that Trump doesn't particularly care what they think and doesn't make decisions based on what they think. He's much more concerned with what the Saudis and the Israelis think.
It certainly, there was a major shift when he, and I'm shocked that it wasn't more promoted this way, but when he installed that new war cabinet, he wiped out 3, he brought in Bolton, he moved Pompeo over, and he pushed Haspel up. I mean, that's a war cabinet. That's a Saudi-Israeli aligned war cabinet. That's a neocon war cabinet. He tossed Rex Tillerson out in a very insulting way. And then the big question became, everyone thought Kelly and Mattis had the most influence with Trump. And of course, Mattis, hates Iran too. And the generals who are closest to Trump, are extremely anti-Iran. But that doesn't mean they want to go to war with Iran. And that doesn't mean that they aren't aware of the importance of Europe in the NATO alliance. So here's the thing. What some people have been saying, and it makes sense, is that Bolton and Pompeo are going to be they're going to put, when you push McMaster and Tillerson out of there, they were, somewhat like-minded with Mattis. And they were a strong force within the National Security Council. Now you've got Mattis sort of standing alone. I don't really know where Kelly stands on that. But you've got Mattis clearly had a lot of power. And the big question is, does he still have a lot of power? Or is he the next one that's going to get shoved out in favor of someone who is going to make who's going to go extremist, in other words? One of the first things that Mattis did when he was appointed, when he was brought in or whatever, confirmed, he was almost immediately on a plane to a NATO summit where Trump had been saying, screw NATO. We don't, it's obsolete. We don't even need NATO. Mattis went over and immediately smoothed that over, calmed it all down, and said all the things that have to be said. And I just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't heard from Mattis in a while. I think he's kind of, I don't even know where he was on Iran. If I know he was less hawkish than Mike Flynn.
He said that we should stay in the Iran deal. He made a public statement.
Okay, well then he's
and now he's been
sidelined.
So they're trying to get him to answer. They're trying to get him to make a statement on it now, and he is kind of not saying anything. So
well. I mean, this funny thing is,
I think Angela Merkel's trying to push that button though right now.
Yeah, and I think that, but I think the train has left the station.
It's
it's over. I mean, this is over. I don't think this is. Even the Iranians have said this is the end, because they're not going to come back to the table now and renegotiate after they made all those concessions. So I think the Iran deal's dead. I don't even think that's an option anymore. So Merkel can nudge all she wants. No one cares. But the issue now is you had Iranian hardliners like Mike Flynn there. Flynn gets done by whoever, probably John Brennan. And slowly but surely, the recongeals like the T-1000 and Terminator 2, and we now have John Bolton in there, who's just as much as a hardliner than Flynn, although clearly a lot more disciplined.
Much worse, I think,
and more disciplined. That's why he's more of a kind of a threat on it, because he kind of knows how to make the machinery work, whereas Flynn was a bit of a wild card.
And Bolton is ruthless,
yeah,
whereas Flynn probably wasn't.
Or maybe he's more crazy than ruthless, whereas Bolton is just much more ruthless and calculating. In any case,
he's going to threaten people if they don't do what they're. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, he's going to clean house. But the issue is this really? This is definitely a war cabinet, and this is definitely an anti-Iran cabinet. But how far does this really go?
Right.
So they've scrapped the deal. They flexed muscles. They're more than happy to, write off Europe, which is no small thing, but no big thing either. Are they going to Are they going to get involved in a shooting war with Iran? And from what I read, there was one article that was released, I saw, by a neocon rag over there, Washington Free Beacon. They actually had to change the title, which I caught and tweeted. They originally said it was this memo that was given to Trump, the Trump admin, was supposed to spark regime change, and they said, help the Iranian people, I think, as they changed the...
regime change is a toxic term. You can see politicians like, no, this is not regime change.
Yeah, you saw it in real time.
No one's allowed to say regime change.
Because I caught it on the way back machine, that thing that's always hacked, according to Joy Reid. In any case, they said that they advised that Trump should not actually try to invade militarily, but should instead, increase overt and covert support for the opposition within Iran. Now, wouldn't you know, that's like basically saying let's arm and even, I guess to a greater extent, support the MEK type terrorist groups in Iran and the supposed, the next round of freedom fighters, the next Ahmed Shalabi types. But, so now you're seeing...
It's a color revolution formula.
Yeah, right, yeah. But I'd be surprised if that... In any case, though, that Iran is not going to take that lightly. So that's an escalation, for sure. It's certainly an escalation far away from the Iran deal. So what happens when... Well, here's the question, then. What happens when that doesn't work?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to. The Iranian regime is made itself rather clear on this point that it is not going to go. It's not going to go like Mubarak or Tunisia, where large protests. They're just going to gun down protesters. But that's just the reality on the ground. So even if you have, let's say you get to the point where what's actually going to happen is they're going to fund a bunch of terrorist nut jobs who are going to, in fact, strengthen the regime because people are going to want not be associated with them, like MEK. But let's say you actually get what you want from this, and it spurs these huge uprisings, and then the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and all the rest of it gun them down, and the Ayatollah takes back control and what happens then? Right, which is what happened in 2009, right? The Iranians took to the streets, and the neocon, they always have this counterfactual history, like Syria. If only Obama had stood in, Assad regime would be gone, and we could have this paradise in Syria. And the same thing is with Obama and Iran. If only he had expressed more support, like that matters. Like if he had said more happy things, or even that more of a CIA program, the Iranian protesters wouldn't have been abandoned in 2009. So, but the point of the matter is this: it's not going to work. So what happens when this covert, overt, support for the opposition doesn't work?
Yeah, that's when it gets pretty dangerous, because these people don't give up, ever. And that's the end of the preview part of this bonus episode. The full episode is 1 hour, 25 minutes, and it's available to our patrons at patreon.com/aroundtheempire. And we really hope that you'll join their number, pitch in, help us continue this independent media project. You can also find all of our work at aroundtheempire.com. Thanks so much for listening. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.